Welcome to Sunday School at Cedar Lane United Methodist Church. We continue to study the history of God's redemption of mankind in the Old Testament with the birth of Moses, which is found in Exodus 1:15 through 2:20, or 2:10, I'm sorry. There's a Hallmark Gold Crowned movie that Mary and I like. It's called The Magic of Ordinary Days. It's set during World War II in the Midwest. A young lady has become pregnant with a soldier she had a crush on. She was then shipped by her parents to the Midwest to marry a man, a farmer, she has never met, but who has agreed to marry her. He had prayed and decided that was what God wanted him to do. There was no big romance, no exotic place, no fancy food, just two people learning to love each other, living life on a farm in the winter, day by ordinary day. Speaking of sort of ordinary days, my wife and I walked out into the yard on Wednesday to find one of God's little miracles. I like them. They're fall blooming crocus. Don't know if you've ever seen them. I suspect you have. One day they are not there, and then the next day they are. They just pop up, and they have bright lavender blooms, and so one day is an ordinary sunshine-filled day, and you walk out and here are these things. We have several in our side yard that kind of spread. It's really pretty. And so much of Scripture is filled with ordinary days and ordinary things. In today's lesson, a couple got married and had a baby. No angelic proclamations, no supernatural stars in the sky. Just a mother who had a baby boy, but there are some extraordinary things that occur in their lives. May we not miss what God is doing in the midst of our ordinary days. Maybe we should have a little background to what we're about to read. Jacob, also called Israel, had brought his family to Egypt to save them from starvation during a famine. Now, we don't have time to get into Joseph's story and how God had placed him as the second-ranking official in Egypt. Time had passed after Joseph's death, some 400 years, and there was a new Pharaoh. Israel's children had increased in number from the 70 souls who had come from Canaan. Now, as a side note, if you're looking in Acts, you will see where Stephen says that there were 75. Just as a word there, he says, but the number he used included Joseph's 3 grandsons and 2 great-grandsons. So that's how you get to the 75. Now, according to the NIV notes, the Septuagint translation of the Old Testament added their names to the list found in Genesis 46:27. So we got a couple of things going on, but 70 souls is what left. The Egyptians had become afraid of the Hebrews because of their number. They were afraid if Egypt were attacked, the Hebrews would join their invaders. Their fear caused them to make the Hebrews slaves. And additionally, who wants to get rid of a free labor source? Nobody. So let's read Exodus 2:1-4. Now, a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, And she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Just how afraid was Pharaoh of the Hebrews? In order to limit their population growth and numerical strength, he ordered the midwives to kill all the male babies born to the Hebrews. The midwives feared God, however, and did not do as Pharaoh ordered. Pharaoh demanded an explanation, was told, "The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So then Pharaoh ordered that the male children be thrown into the Nile. Despite the slavery and oppression, life continued to happen, as it always does. Men and women got married and had children, like ours. This is the story of one ordinary couple. You notice that we're not even given their names in these verses. We do find them, however, in Exodus 6:20. Amram married his father's sister, Jochebed, who bore him Aaron and Moses. Amram lived 137 years. Now, let's take note of a few things. Amram married his aunt, his father's sister. And we've mentioned several times in our recent lessons that marriage within the family group was a common custom. Abraham married his half-sister. They had different mothers. Abraham sent his servant to his brother's household to get a wife for Isaac, his son. Now, God made changes later when the law was given to Moses. You notice that Miriam is not mentioned in Exodus 6, even though she is the oldest of the 3 children. In our verse for today, Aaron, the middle child, is the one not mentioned. In Exodus 7, we learn that Aaron was 3 years older than Moses. Exodus 7:7 reads, Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. So that's how we find out that he was 3 years old. So the birth order was Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. Aaron was only 3 years old when Moses was born, so he couldn't have watched Moses in the reeds and spoken to Pharaoh's daughter. So how old was Miriam? We aren't told specifically. Some speculate that she was around 7 years old. Some say she was older. There are several tales about her and her prophetic gift, because she is a prophetess later on. But none of those stories come out of Scripture. However, at the time that Moses was born, she had to be old enough to approach Pharaoh's daughter with confidence and speak to her in Egyptian, not just Hebrew. So I want to point out something for us to be aware of. If you remember what I said in September about the Bible being the history of God's redemption of mankind, well, things we might like to know are left out because they don't affect the redemptive history. Or people are brought into the history only when they begin to play a part in it, as was Aaron when he came to see Moses after Moses met with God at the burning bush in Sinai. Okay, that's verse 1. Should we try verse 2? A common, ordinary activity, a man married a woman and had a baby. Now, the mother saw that the child was no ordinary child. And that's what that fine, the word fine means. He's no ordinary child. So she hid him for 3 months. Now, obviously, she was aware of Pharaoh's order that all the babies had to be thrown into, the male babies had to be thrown into the Nile, because she hid him for those 3 months. But she refused to do it. But at the end of the 3 months, in a sense, she did obey what Pharaoh said. But she put him in a watertight basket and put him in the reeds where he couldn't float downstream and sit Miriam to stand there and watch and see what happened. Exodus 2, verses 5 through 10. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile, and she, together with her maidens, walked along the river's bank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to get it, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a wet nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." Excuse me. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses and said, "Because I drew him out of the water." And that's sort of what Moses means, is to draw out. You notice a couple of things here. Pharaoh's name is not recorded in the scripture, and neither is his daughter's. There is simply no additional information to be had. Sort of maddening, isn't it? Why she came to bathe at the Nile is unknown. Now, I do find it interesting. I looked up the word "at" in the Hebrew. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I have to look things up. And in all of the things that it said, never was the word translated "in." It was always "at," or "about," or "above," or some sort of thing like that. So she came to bathe at the Nile. My question was, did she have some sort of special bath built out there where she could bathe by the river? Who knows? Some speculation. We know she would have had several baths within the palace that she could have gone and bathed in, but she chose to go out there to bathe that day. And that ordinary choice put her where God wanted her to be. Our author discusses the identity of the she in verses 5 through 6, because there's a lot of them. And there seem to be different actors. To me, the daughter of Pharaoh is the primary actor and is the she referred to everywhere except in verse 5b, the second part of 5, where she has sent her slave, her maiden, to pick up the basket. And it says, "And she brought it to her." Now, to me, that means Pharaoh's daughter is doing all of these she things that's talked about, except for right here, where the maiden comes. Most likely, it was just the bottom of the basket that was coated in tar and pitch. not the entire basket. She wants it to float. She doesn't want to seal him in there where he can't breathe. She wants it to float. So make that tight. It had to be able to handle the weight of the basket and the weight of a 3-month-old, which would be what, 10 pounds, 12 pounds, maybe somewhere in there. The question is, did it have handles? Didn't think about that. Probably did. That's the way the maiden could pick it up and carry it to Pharaoh's daughter without getting her hands dirty. I kept sitting there looking at it and going, how could she carry this thing? Oh, handles. All baskets have some sort of a handle. And the lid wouldn't have had pitch on it. So Pharaoh's daughter could have opened it up without getting her hands dirty as well. But notice the compassion the daughter of Pharaoh had when she saw the crying baby, even though she fully recognized that it was a Hebrew baby. She was not heartless. She was a ruler, but she was not heartless. She did not want to see this baby cry, or crying, or dying. One thing to note in all of this, our author points out that it was the women who took the risk of disobeying Pharaoh's order in order to do justice and mercy. The midwives who refused to kill the male children, Jochebed, who hid her child, Pharaoh's daughter for adopting Moses, and Miriam for speaking to Pharaoh's daughter. I think we can't underestimate the difference in class between the slaves and the rulers. For Miriam to approach her and speak to her was probably pretty dangerous, but she did it anyway. Personally, I don't think the daughter of Pharaoh was naive when Miriam offered to find a wet nurse. We think, oh yeah, go get one. No, she was probably like, yeah, okay, I know who this is. She probably had a good idea that Miriam was the baby's big sister who had been hiding nearby, and the nurse would be his mother. Nevertheless, she was wise enough to pay Jochebed so that Jochebed could tell anyone who asked that she was nursing the baby for Pharaoh's daughter and save his life. Now, Moses would have been 2 or 3 years old when Jochebed took him to Pharaoh's daughter, where he was then named Moses. Pharaoh's daughter named him. Jochebed probably had a name for him, but we don't have that. Moses, who was rescued from certain death, would at a future date redeem and rescue God's people who were in dire straits themselves. As I looked at this story, if you haven't guessed it by now, the thing that stood out to me was the number of ordinary events of life that took place to get Moses into Pharaoh's household, where he would have had all the benefits of training and education that a slave would never get. God worked through ordinary events to do extraordinary things. Do we miss ordinary things God is doing in our own lives because we think of them as ordinary? Last week, I kind of got to experience this firsthand. We were giving some things after a yard sale to the Ladies of Charity. I'd already made one trip, and I decided to load some of the last stuff up into the van, which we had already removed all the seats and everything so we could carry a lot of stuff. So I was there, I'd gotten there and opened the doors and talked to the lady, and she was helping me unload stuff. It wasn't a huge amount, just larger stuff, pictures, that kind of thing. And while I was there, there was a young man that came to her and said, "Hey, I'm here to pick up the couch that I bought." Now, he had two other friends with him, and on all my trips back and forth, I saw that his car was there and the hatch was open and everything. But I just kept emptying my van. So their car was several feet behind mine as they were doing this. So after my eyes closed, I could walk out to the car and close the hatch, the back hatch, and turn around to look to see three guys going, "This couch is not fitting in this car." So they were puzzled and discouraged. And I took one look at that van and went, "You guys need some help?" They said, "Yeah." So I backed the van up and we loaded the couch and took it over to his house, which was just a few blocks away. I was there not because I heard some voice from heaven say, "Go to Ladies of Charity now," but as a matter of course, as a matter of a decision to go there in the process of my day. For me, it was an ordinary decision. For them, it was God's provision and a way to show them how much God loved them. We so often look for the spectacular as a sign of God's working in our lives that we fail to recognize the everyday, ordinary miracles God does using us to show his love to others. We can see the truth of Psalm 37:23 that says, "The steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord, and he delighteth in his way." I pray that you have a wonderful week. Thank you for being with us. Hope to see you next week.